We have a lot to discuss. On Monday, the Jets lost Breece Hall and Alijah Vera-Tucker for the season. They traded for running back James Robinson from Jacksonville, and Elijah Moore might be coming back. We'll talk about all of this today on the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, October 25th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com, thanking you for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. This podcast is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit the subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening. You'll never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find the podcast. It was a very eventful Monday for the New York Jets, and unfortunately, there was more negative than there was positive. But there was some positive. We're going to talk about all of it today because there was so much news for this team yesterday. It was kind of an unusual Monday. Usually Mondays are days you just break down what happened in the game, and there's not a lot going on. Of course, much of this came on the injury front because the Jets lost what I would argue are their two best offensive players for the season due to injuries. Really unfortunate, and I think you have to begin by talking about the injury to Breece Hall. Breece Hall has a torn ACL. He also has minor meniscus injury to his knee, so he's done for the season. You hope that he's able to come back next season. This is a really tough loss for the Jets, in part because of how little they've gotten out of their passing game. During this winning streak, especially the last 3 weeks, it's been all Breece Hall. I mean, Breece Hall has been almost the entire offense for this team. And even, the game a couple of weeks ago against Miami where the Jets did throw for about 200 yards, Breece Hall had 100 of those receiving yards. So it has been the Breece Hall offense. And even against Denver on Sunday, he broke the scoring open with that long touchdown run. He's been able to do it all. The Jets have been able to count on gaining positive yardage just by handing him the ball. Life is so much easier when you can trust a running back to get you a decent gain. It makes it easier as a play caller, makes it easier on the quarterback, and again, the Jets have not gotten much out of their passing game. Breece Hall has been every bit as good as advertised, and that's been great for the Jets. You trade up for a running back in the second round in today's NFL, you're expecting him to be spectacular, and Breece Hall has been spectacular. He was playing I think he was in the mix for All-Pro if he continued playing at the level he was at. And yeah, he began a little bit slow. That first game against Baltimore, he had a fumble. He slowly got better every single week as he got more comfortable. And he's just a player that's going to be impossible to replace with one guy. I think it has to be a multiplayer situation. You're not going to have one player who's going to step in and be Breece Hall. Michael Carter's a quality back, but Michael Carter's not Breece Hall. I almost equate it to the reverse of a situation the Jets had at corner last year because during the offseason, people were asking, well, why would you draft Sauce Gardner when you have Bryce Hall? And that situation is it's kind of the inverse because there's a difference between being a guy who's not a weakness and being a guy who changes the game. Last year, Bryce Hall was not a weakness. Sauce Gardner changed the game. Michael Carter's not a weakness, but he doesn't change the game like Breece Hall does. So the Jets really, it's going to be tough to replace him. The Jets also lost Alijah Vera-Tucker yesterday. We'll talk about him a little bit later. That's a big loss. I don't think it's as big as Breece Hall. I think Breece Hall is the most important player on offense. One of the three best players on the team this year. I think there are three guys who are in contention for All-Pro this year on the Jets. Breece Hall was one of them. The other two, I think, are Quinnen Williams and Sauce Gardner. And there's no easy way to replace him. The Jets did their best, however, because they did make a trade last night for James Robinson from Jacksonville, who had kind of fallen out of favor. The Jets give up a conditional day 3 pick. It sounds like it's going to be a 5 based on the terms, based on the early reports of the terms. It sounds like essentially James Robinson has to get something like 260 rushing yards with the Jets. And if he doesn't, then it becomes a 6. So it's one of those things where it sounds like the Jets were willing to give up a 5, but they built in a protection in case Robinson just does not pan out at all so that it will only be a 6. I don't see how you dislike the trade. I think it's a good trade. Look, the Jets, here's the thing. The Jets kind of had to make a move at the running back position. And not so much because of Michael Carter, because of what was behind Carter. In today's NFL, and I think especially going forward with the Jets, you kind of have a backfield tandem. You're gonna have two guys who are gonna be in the mix. And Michael Carter, I think, should be fine. But behind him, you got Ty Johnson, who does not bring a lot to the table, if we're being honest. I guess he's okay as a runner, but he gives you nothing in the passing game. And James Robinson's been a decent receiver through his career. If you look at the advanced numbers, most of them will tell you he's probably an above-average back. He's probably somewhere between average and above average, and I'd say lean more toward above average based on the numbers, the advanced numbers, and what Jacksonville fan. Every Jacksonville fan I've come across absolutely hated giving him up for the price they gave him up for. The Jets did not pay a lot for James Robinson. He's a tough runner. He's going to help the Jets out in the run game. He could probably help the Jets out in the receiving game. He's not Breece. Listen, if there was a Breece, if there was another Breece out there, he wouldn't be available in a trade. The Jets would not be able to get him. So you can't really compare James Robinson to Breece Hall. What you have to compare him to is Ty Johnson, because Ty Johnson's the option. Ty Johnson's the guy the Jets replaced to add James Robinson. And I don't think there's any question James Robinson's better than Ty Johnson. James Robinson's a quality starting back in this league. And the Jets may not have a superstar in the backfield right now, but now they have two quality starting backs, in my opinion. And they'll still be able to run the ball. And the passing game's going to have to pick things up. And that was going to be true no matter what, because the Jets are just not getting enough out of their passing game. Jets, I don't know if fortunate's the right word, but you usually don't win games getting so little out of your passing game. It's not so much. I think people mistake it. They point to Zach Wilson's lack of touchdowns. They point to the lack of yardage. It's just more the inefficiency of the passing game's been very inefficient when it's been called upon. You could be a run-first team and still be an efficient passing team. The Jets have not been an efficient passing team, and it's almost a guarantee they're going to start getting more, because it's really not sustainable to get as little as you've been getting. The Jets have been getting like Luke Falk level production from their passing game the last couple of weeks, so it's going to get better. The question is how much better. And the Jets probably needed to be quite a bit better now without Breece Hall. They were going to need it anyway, because you're just not going to win consistently getting so little throwing the football. They're going to need more now, because while James Robinson and Michael Carter are a quality duo, they're not going to give you what Breece Hall could give you. James Robinson does not replace the big play element, and that's really where I think Breece Hall set himself apart. You get a lot of the same stuff from Michael Carter and Breece Hall, and there's a lot of the same capabilities, but Carter does not have that extra gear where he can take something 50 yards. And James Robinson really doesn't either, and so you're not going to have that big splash play happen as frequently. It can happen occasionally, but it's not going to happen with the level of frequency. And that's the thing that I think set Breece apart from Carter and a lot of other backs in this league. So they'll get good. I still think they'll be able to run the ball effectively, but it's not going to be as dynamic in the run game. Now, I've seen some people question, well, should the Jets be trading for a player? Should the Jets be buyers at the deadline? That question shocks me. And it's kind of amazing that at 5-2, second best record in the conference, people still don't really believe in the Jets. And I understand there are some elements here that suggest maybe the Jets are a little ahead of schedule. Maybe they're due for some regression. You can't ignore the backup quarterbacks they've played. You can't ignore the record in close games. 3-0 in close games. It's not so easy to do. And there probably has been an element of luck, especially if you watch that Cleveland game, the Jets got a little bit lucky. So I understand the argument that maybe this is not, maybe the Jets are a little bit ahead of schedule right now. But at some point, I think it just is about people who had a perception in the preseason, and they just can't imagine that perception being wrong. The Patriots, and this may change after the way they played last night, the Patriots began the week as favorites over the Jets. Road favorite. Look at the way these two teams have played since the start of the season. I said this a couple weeks ago against Green Bay. If you only watch these teams from the start of the season, it's inconceivable. It doesn't mean the Patriots can't win, but it's inconceivable that, to me, that an objective observer who's watched both of these teams since the start of the season would say this. I would even understand it if the game was in Foxborough, but an objective observer is going to look at the way these two teams have played since the beginning of the season and say the Patriots should win on the road. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I think a lot of it's people just cannot get over their biases. Nobody was expecting the Jets to be this good this year. And again, I understand that there are some warning signs that maybe the Jets aren't quite as good as they're playing, but I don't think you can rule out that the Jets might be one of the top teams in the AFC this year. Can you completely rule it out? At some point, we're almost halfway, not quite, almost halfway through the season. At some point, you just have to look at what the evidence is telling you. And so far, the evidence is telling you the Jets have the second best record in the conference. Maybe the Jets are actually a good team. And beyond that, maybe this is just the type of year where everything's lining up for them. And you haven't gotten many of those years recently for the Jets. And when you have had those years, they just haven't had enough talent to take advantage. Back in 2019, second half of their season, they just got bad quarterback after bad quarterback, and they went 6-2. The problem was they started 1-7 that year, so they could not take advantage of it. Go back to 2013, the Jets were expected to be the worst team in the league. They got a lot of luck. They won 2 games because teams committed personal fouls in the last minute of the fourth quarter or overtime. They only went 8-8 because they just didn't have the talent to take advantage of it. Sometimes in the NFL, you just have a year where everything lines up for you, and you have to do everything in your power. Imagine we got to the end of the season and the Jets were lacking a running back. And you didn't make this trade. And they didn't give up a whole lot for James Robinson either. There's a difference. I'm not saying that there's a middle ground between doing what the Rams do and just shred their draft picks and making measured moves where you're not really giving up a lot, but you're addressing a need on your team. The Jets should not be making deals like San Francisco made for Christian McCaffrey where they're giving up their entire draft. But the Jets can make some moves if they come at moderate prices, or even some moves that aren't at such moderate prices. There's players who are, if there's a great player available for your first round pick, you might want to look at doing it. And it depends on who the player is, but I wouldn't rule it out. I wouldn't rule out even trading an early pick right now, because sometimes you just have to take advantage when an opportunity presents itself. If you've been a Jets fan long enough, you remember after those 2 AFC Championship game trips in 2009, 2010, people weren't that upset, especially after 2009, but even after 10, there was a perception. It was Rex Ryan's second year. It was Mark Sanchez's second year. It was we'll be back. It's okay that we lost. Well, sometimes windows close quicker than you think. Jets have not been back to the playoffs since that night in Pittsburgh in early January of 2011. And if you have a year where everything's lining up, I don't know that everything's going to line up for the Jets next year the way it did this year. The Jets are setting themselves up that it's almost certain they're going to regress in 23, and it's not necessarily a sign that they're moving in the wrong direction. It's just unlikely that things are going to line. And, half of it in the NFL is not what you do. Half of it is just whether you get the bounces. And the Jets are getting the bounces this year. So there's an opportunity there. And I go back to something I've been saying for weeks. It's not like the AFC is loaded with great teams. This isn't the mid-2000s where you had Brady and New England and Peyton Manning and Indianapolis and the Chargers out in the West Coast playing great and Dick LeBeau's Steelers defense, where it was just a loaded. This is not a loaded conference. You got Buffalo, who's a great team. You got Kansas City, who we're giving the benefit of the doubt because they're off to a good start, and you expect them to be great, and they have Mahomes, so we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. After that, there's just a bunch of teams that are equal, and Jets are in that mix. So I can't understand why people would say, let's not make a move. You have an opportunity here to make some noise in this conference this year. You got to take it. And the Jets, I think, were able to address the running back position pretty well. There's another spot, though, that Jets suffered a pretty big injury at on Monday, or Sunday, that was announced as a season-ending injury on Monday. Jets lost Alijah Vera-Tucker, the most valuable offensive lineman. We'll talk about the implications on that as we continue this Tuesday episode of Locked On Jets. Now a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. Taking care of your mental health is really important. Everybody's always known that you have to take care of your physical health, but over the last couple of years, it's become clear that taking care of your mental health is just as important. And there are plenty of ways you can do it. You could do meditation. You could talk with somebody. But if you're thinking about therapy, BetterHelp might be an option for you. It's convenient, accessible, affordable, and entirely online. You can get matched with a therapist after filling out a brief survey, and you could switch therapists at any time. When you want to be a better problem solver, therapy can get you there. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. Again, that's BetterHelp, BetterHelp.com/lockedon. Jets are off to a great start this season. It's still unclear whether they will be competing for a championship ring, but there are other moments in life where you need to get a ring. And whether you're looking to pop the question, have a milestone to celebrate, or want to let your love sparkle, Blue Nile can help you make your celebrations even more memorable. As the original online jeweler, Blue Nile has the largest selection of independently graded diamonds and pieces priced significantly below traditional retailers. Blue Nile has helped millions of couples celebrate their perfect engagement by getting them the perfect ring. Their easy online tools let you choose the diamond, shape, size, and clarity as well as setting style. Blue Nile's bench of jewelers will help you handcraft her perfect one-of-a-kind engagement ring. If you're looking for a fine piece of jewelry to commemorate a special milestone, but you're still having trouble choosing, Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7 available via phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at any budget. Make your moment sparkle with Blue Nile. Go to BlueNile.com and use code LOCKEDON to save $50 on your purchase of $500 or more. That's BLUENILE.com code LOCKEDON to save $50 on your purchase of $500 or more. BlueNile.com, code LOCKEDON. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen every day. And for your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Today we're talking about an eventful Monday for the Jets. Frankly, more bad than good because they lost probably their two best offensive players for the season. And they did make a good trade, I think, adding James Robinson from Jacksonville. We talked about Breece Hall. That, to me, is the number one injury. But the number two injury is Alijah Vera-Tucker, who's probably been this Jets' second best offensive player. Clearly their best offensive lineman, their most valuable offensive lineman, because he played three spots. And I keep going back to this amazing fact. Alijah Vera-Tucker's played three spots on the offensive line this year. And none of them were the spot he played last year. So he's a guy who's shown you he can play effectively at four different positions on the offensive line. The only one he can't play is center. I don't think he'll ever play center. It's frustrating because he's really been developing, and he's shown that he might be the answer at tackle. And we know the Jets have had issues at the tackle position and injury this year. Vera-Tucker is the fifth player going to IR at the tackle position. Fortunately, Dwayne Brown got back. George Fant, Max Mitchell, maybe they'll come off IR in the weeks ahead. They've just been decimated by injury at the tackle position. But longer term, tackle's a huge question mark for this team because George Fant's going to be a free agent, and indications are Fant's probably not going to be here next year. It seems like he's not thrilled with the team. It seems like the team's not thrilled with him. Beyond that, I don't know if you're counting on Dwayne Brown to have another year. Mekhi Becton's not really a guy you can count on. Heading into this offseason, you could argue the Jets need to need new guys at both tackle positions. Well, with Alijah Vera-Tucker able to play tackle, maybe that cuts the need down to just one new tackle. And maybe that makes life easier on you. But this is a tough loss, and part of it's because it felt like the Jets had finally found the right mix on the offensive line with Brown at left tackle, Laken Tomlinson at left guard, Connor McGovern at center, Nate Herbig at right guard, and Vera-Tucker at right tackle. And each of these injuries makes an additional injury tougher to deal with. If you still had Breece Hall, this is a little bit easier because you're still going to be able to run the ball. Breece Hall doesn't necessarily need spectacular blocking to produce. Now with Breece Hall out, though, it puts a bigger emphasis on your blocking. And losing Vera-Tucker has kind of a compounding impact. It hurts you more. And part of the reason it hurts you more is that with Breece Hall out, and again, the Jets were going to need to get more out of their passing game anyway. But now with Breece Hall out, they're going to have to lean even more into this passing game to produce, because they're not going to be able to get the same level of production in the run game. They're definitely not going to be able to get the same level of big plays. I think the run game is not going to be a weakness. I think it's going to be okay. I think the Jets are still going to be able to run the ball effectively, but they're not going to have those splash plays anymore. And that means they're going to need to make up for it somehow. I don't know that it's going to be, I think these running backs are solid. These running backs, though, are not going to be able to duplicate Breece Hall's production. So that means you're going to need to get splash plays out of the passing game. And without Vera-Tucker in there, that's a little bit tougher because, to make big plays in the passing game, the easiest way to do that, the best way to do that, is to hit long passes down the field. Long passes down the field take a long time to develop, which means you're going to need exceptional blocking up front. And with Vera-Tucker out of there, it just makes life tougher. It's almost to the point where, and I don't want I hate using this choice, but it's almost to the point where you would have rather lost the Denver game. And it doesn't really make sense because this one has nothing to do with the other, but if you had the option, you almost would have taken the loss in Denver just to keep Vera-Tucker and Breece Hall around all season because, again, the Jets lost their two best offensive players in this game. That doesn't mean the season's over. And listen, I have told you when the season was over because of an injury. I've gotten people angry with me at that when I've said an injury has ended the season. I do not think this ends the season for the Jets, but I think it makes the road a lot tougher because you're not just dealing with one key injury. You're dealing with injuries to your two best players. You're dealing with an injury to your best skill player and your best offensive lineman. Now, who's going to step into, I don't really know who's going to step into the lineup. Again, you hope Fant gets better in the weeks ahead. You hope, maybe Max Mitchell even comes back. But, I mean, the Jets are going to be putting guys in there who were not even on their team at the beginning of the season. You're going to have a guy who was signed off the street at the beginning of the season. It's a tough spot to be in, especially at tackle. So maybe a trade. This could be another spot where the Jets look to make a trade. If they could get, and the question is, Jack Conklin available from Cleveland? Things have worked so well with the other Conklin the Jets have gotten, but Jack Conklin's an excellent tackle. I mean, will he be available? There's rumors about Laramie Tunsil, who, that's a guy. We want to talk about a guy. If he's available, that's a guy you give up a premium pick to get because he's just rock solid and he would really help Zach Wilson. He'd really help the rest of the offense. So maybe there is a trade for a big name. I don't know. I think it's an interesting spot. I think it'll be worth watching to see what the Jets do, but you hope somebody gets healthy, even if it's Max Mitchell, but really George Fant, because this offensive line got worse. And in some ways, maybe it's not so bad because the Jets have had to shuffle guys in and out of the offensive line all season, so at least they're used to doing it. But it's tough. I mean, this is a tough spot. It's tough to suffer this many injuries on your offensive line. Jets have had a lot of good fortune this year. The one spot where they've had some really bad luck are offensive line injuries. And we'll see what happens, but they're going to need to find a new mix going forward. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about a guy who could be returning. It's not 100% clear yet that Alijah Moore is going to be back in the mix, but Robert Saleh said yesterday he's expecting the second-year receiver to be back with the team and to play this weekend against the New England Patriots. What can Alijah Moore add to the team? We'll discuss as we continue this Tuesday episode of Locked On Jets. If you're a daily fantasy player, Breece Hall's probably been one of your go-to guys the last couple of weeks, so you'll need to find a new player to kind of lean on in daily fantasy. But if you are playing, let me tell you about PrizePicks. Here's how it works. You pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. And if you don't want to pick players who are going against the Jets and you just want to avoid the NFL, PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch. So you got the NHL, you got the NBA, you got baseball, college football, men's and women's college basketball, which are coming up. You got soccer, esports, NASCAR, tennis, MMA, boxing, and disc golf. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. They're safe and fast withdrawals, and they are currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to PrizePicks to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. So if you deposit $50, PrizePicks gives you another $50. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks gives you another $100. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON, one word with no space, LOCKEDON, at sign up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. Talking about an eventful Monday for the New York Jets as they lost 2 key players to injury for the season on the offensive side of the ball. They added a key player in James Robinson, and they might be adding another key player. Robert Saleh said in his press conference yesterday that he is expecting Alijah Moore to rejoin the team this week. He's expecting Alijah Moore to play this weekend against New England. Now, some of this is going to come down to Alijah Moore because we haven't really heard from Alijah Moore yet. Is he going to come back? And it feels like Alijah Moore's got some relationships to repair because just based on some of the comments the Jets have made, based on some of the social media posts from members of the team, it doesn't seem like he had a lot of support, which, if you followed what Alijah Moore did, is no real surprise. But as I said last week, and it's even more true now without these 2 players on offense, even though they play different positions, Alijah Moore needs the Jets because the Jets don't trade him. He can't play professional football. So does he want to retire? Do he want to sit out a couple of years? If he wants to play and get a second contract, he's got to return to the Jets at least for now, even if he wants to trade in the offseason. But the Jets need him because Jets need players on offense. This passing game struggled enough without trading Alijah Moore. And I don't know that, I guess, James Robinson showed that maybe you can get a player Maybe you can get an offensive player, but the Jets should be adding players. They should not be subtracting players. Now, again, a lot of it's going to come down to Elijah Moore needs to show some contrition for what he did. He needs to show some humility because I don't think there was any excuse for what he did last week. But if he's willing to do that, I think the Jets will welcome him back. And, I think Robert Saleh said all the right things. He said, it's on Elijah Moore now. If he's willing to come back, we're happy to have him. And I go back to what I said earlier. Jets need to get more out of their passing game. They're not going to get the same number of big plays out of their run game, which means the passing game is going to have to pick up the slack. Well, it would be nice to have a guy with Elijah Moore's speed on the outside to maybe produce some of those plays. Elijah Moore's kind of been an afterthought in the offense, especially the last couple of weeks. We know that. That's why he got so angry. But there's an opportunity here. And the way things like this work is, if a player comes back after a situation like this and he plays well, he becomes like the fan favorite. You don't know what's going to happen long term with Elijah Moore. Would I be surprised if there was an offseason trade? No, because that's a point where the Jets can realistically expect to replace somebody like Elijah Moore. He may just decide enough. But for the time being, it's in the interest of everybody to make this thing work. Elijah Moore, if he wants out, he needs to increase his trade value. He needs to get his value to a point where a trade would actually entice the Jets. And the Jets, I understand the argument people are making that you just want him out of the team, that you don't want him in the locker room. I understand that, but this is the National Football League. You need talent to win. And sometimes you have to put up with stuff in a way you don't at lower levels because you need to win. It's about winning. There's a lot of money involved. So the Jets need to figure out a way to make this work with Elijah Moore. And, he's going to get his wish because without Breece Hall in the lineup, there's an opportunity now for more touches. There's an opportunity to be featured more in the game plan. Even though you may say, well, one's a running back, one's a receiver, but without being able to produce as much in the run game, the passing game is going to have to do more. And listen, we saw what happened last week when Elijah Moore and Corey Davis aren't out there. Jets really had some issues at the receiver position. It's a decent receiver group when they're healthy, but once you suffer an injury or two, or once you lose a guy or two, it becomes very dicey. And I don't know how. I can't watch that game on Sunday against Denver and say that this team's better without Elijah Moore than it is with him in the lineup. Jets got to get more out of their passing game, and Elijah Moore is going to be a big part of the solution going forward. And maybe they can even manufacture some touches for him in space. Maybe you replace some of the Breece Hall big runs with some screens to Elijah Moore, some end arounds, some jet sweeps. You figure out ways to just get the ball in his hands and utilize that speed, because we've seen that he can make big plays. Maybe not so much this year, but last year he made a number of big plays for this team when he was given the ball in space. So you hope he comes back, and a lot of this is on Elijah Moore. Robert Saleh said yesterday he's expecting Elijah Moore back, but we haven't heard from Elijah Moore. So it's going to be very interesting to watch and see what he does. And, if he's willing to come back, the Jets are clearly going to accept him. But is he just going to, is he going to burn the bridge? That's the question. And if he does, he might be out of the NFL soon. So very much in his interest to make this work with the Jets, at least for now. And maybe he can help the Jets weather the storm that they had with these injuries. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening. Hit the bell if you're watching on YouTube. You'll never miss an episode. You'll get notifications as new episodes are posted. If you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review. It helps the channel out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. So does giving this episode a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Have a great Tuesday, everybody. Send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow we have our weekly mailbag scheduled, unless the Jets make another trade.